Right, so in this video I'm going to go through events and I'm going to make the game pause and how to react to that using events. Okay, so just FYI before we start, that I have created a text in the middle which I could put the word paused in. So I've just created, I actually just duplicated the score text and move it there. I call it paused. It's ready to show pause or not when we're ready to show pause, really. So now I'm going to have a look at our events controller. And this is going to be the events in our game. And so what an event is, it's like, imagine if there was a broadcast system where objects could wait for something to happen, and when it did, they would run a method. So I'm, say, for example, a player, and when the game is paused, I will automatically run this method in my class called paused. And then when it's unpaused, I can run unpaused. I'm like waiting for something to happen. I'm listening for this trigger that can be triggered by something. So I'm going to show you how this works. So I'm making a public static class called events controller. Now what that means is, because it's a static class in Unity, it doesn't even need to be on an object. Okay, and it isn't. There is no events controller. I've just got it down here, and because it's a static class, it doesn't inherit from mono behavior. Okay, and there's no instance of it because it's a static class. So I've created a delegate. Now, if you haven't watched my video on delegates, you should do that because you might get confused, but you can still follow anyway because you can use this without really knowing the ins and outs of how it works. But what it is, in fact, if I move this out of the way, I'll move this down here because they kind of come in like pairs. That's kind of like each one. So when an event triggers in the game, what happens is methods have to register themselves to that event. So, for example, the game paused event, if I want something to trigger on my player, I have to have a method that is void with no parameters. Now, it's only because I've made this here. I could put parameters in there, but then all of the methods that register would need to follow that. In reality, if you're not following, nearly always with events, although I'm going to show you one later that doesn't, you don't care about what's triggering it. You just want to know that something has triggered the event. So here, this is my basic event layout. It's just going to say that if it's an event delegate, then it doesn't have a return value and no parameters. Okay, so this is actually the event, right? And so this public static method just calls the event. Okay, it's an easy way to call it. You could put this, say when the pause key is pressed, like I'm actually checking if the pause key is pressed in a new script called game controller here, which I won't, all this is just a game controller that checks if the key is pressed, right? If it's pressed, it triggers this, right? It is also changing something in a minute I'll go through, but don't worry too much about that. It's quite obvious really when you look at it. So anyway, so actually I'll put that there. So you need, for an event, you need to design that. Right, so if you wanted a new event, you design that bit, you write that in your events controller, just like that. Then you go to where you want the event to happen. So in this case, it's the game pause pressed. So we go here and we're doing in this game controller that I've made, you can stick on an object called game controller and put it in the service locator, would be a good idea. Okay, but you should be used to that by now. I've done it in every video. It's on the screen now, so you can pause it. Obviously, then you drag it in. But if you didn't drag it in, this would get it anyway, but it is better to drag it in. As long as it's a child of the event, so as long as it is a child of the event service locator. So anyway, so the game controller, and in level data, I added a boolean whether it's false or true. Okay, I've added in the level data. So that game controller checks level data. If it's true, that's what that means. Then run the unpaused event because we're going from paused to unpaused, and then set pause to false. Otherwise, run the paused event and set the level data to true. Right, so here it's going to be set to true. And the UI controller is just checking that level data.pause boolean and setting the UI text to paused or to empty. So that's what that's doing. So if that is true, then the UI will show paused, otherwise it will show not paused. But that's not really to do events. None of that's to do events. That's all stuff we've done before that you should all have been able to add yourself anyway if you followed the stuff. Okay, so if we're paused, set the UI text to paused, otherwise set it to empty. Right, so that's what that is. So this will work. There you go, pause, unpause. And it is triggering the event, okay? So the event is being triggered. Now, how do things listen to the event? Well, they do it like this. So if we go to our player controller, okay, you do this. So this is, so what you do is on the enable, the events controller.game paused, I'm adding a reference to this method to it. Now the method, because if you look at the events controller, is using event delegate. An event delegate is void with no parameters. That means that the event that has to be void with no parameters. Void with no parameters. Okay? And then the same with unpaused, because they're both event delegate design. Okay? And all they're doing is set a boolean to true or false. And then in my update, okay, I do if it's paused, returns. That means you can't move or shoot, right? Because it's going to skip them. Now, I'm going to show you something quickly in my game controller. I'm just going to take this out because I'll explain that in a minute. I didn't want you to watch me typing it for ages. It can get quite boring. So, now that would stop my player from moving. So, pause. Now I can't move. All right? But it doesn't stop bullets that I've already shot. Okay? And so we have to do two things. We have to stop the time scale, and that will stop all movement. And so in the game controller here, this is actually also registering on that event. So it's on the enable, it's registering for the paused event. It's running paused. By the way, they haven't got to be called paused, unpaused. You can call them anything. But as long as that and that match. And then, so when that event gets triggered, okay, by the P key being pressed, it will it will pause and unpause, and that sets timescale to 0 and timescale to 1. Now you might think, doesn't that fix the problem of enemy moving anyway? And it would actually. So if I go to player moving, it does actually fix it, even if I don't do anything in here. So even if I just set the timescale to 0, like this, so you can follow this, like you can just write that in, okay, into a game controller script, right? Yeah, so this is the game controller script. Now, if I run that, and I pause it. Now you think, wow, it's brilliant. So why do I need to have that thing in the player then that says, am I paused or not? Well, unfortunately, it pauses movement because it copies time.delta time. But if I shoot, I can still shoot because that part of the code isn't following time.delta time. And now I've made about 1 billion bullets on top of each other. Luckily, I miss enemy. Pause. And that enemy's going to die because about 10 bullets here. And see, that's the problem as well. See, it will stop movement of things, that timescale equals 0, but it will still respond to key presses and stuff because you want it to. Because obviously, think about it. Are you going to close or click a button on the thing? Am I going to press P if we're not responding to key presses, right? Say logic. So the way to do it is on objects that you need to not do things, you go to them, you register them with that event, you keep some sort of Boolean. I mean, we could have a global. We could actually just check that level data. To be honest, I could actually not bother registering this event here and check the level data is not paused. And probably that's the best way. But I'm trying to demonstrate events here, so I'm showing it this way. Because it might also be that I want to do something to the sprite when it's paused, like, I don't know, dim it or something like that. I don't know. And then I would need to do something here. I don't know. And I'm only not talking just about pause here. But anyway, so on the event, this player controller registers for the game pause event and adds that. And then it sets a Boolean to true, which I set up here. Okay, I don't know why it's saying that. Oh, I took out the if. So if it's pause return, which means skip that. Okay, right, so let's add a completely new event from scratch so you can understand what we're doing, right? So let's add one that the game has started so I can play a... let's actually add an event that when all the enemies are dead, right? So all enemies are dead. So what do? Right, well, we write public static enemies all dead. Oh, and then we do event delegate. Okay, we write things properly. Okay, so that is... I should have put event. There we go. So you write that. Okay. Then we're going to copy and paste this, obviously, because it's the code that's going to execute that. So I'm going to put enemies have all died. What? And then if that's got something in it, run them, right? So that's how you make a new event, right? Like that. Just make sure you've got this at the top. Okay. Then we need to trigger the event. So we need something to look to see if all the enemies are dead. Well, I'm going to put that in game controller. Now, this is not the best way to do it. I will do that properly in another one. But I'm going to do a very lazy thing, and I'm going to count the number of objects. But I've got to be honest, I can't remember how to count the number of objects in the game. So, it's find object with tags, isn't it? So it's find object by tag. What's tag? I'll find object of type. I'm actually going to have to Google this. Unity, find object by tag. I'm pretty sure there is a find object by tag. Find objects with game tag. Yeah, there we go. It's called game object. Right, okay. Copy and paste if in doubt. Boom. Var, enemies, game object returns, enemy. Right? Okay. So that's going to find all the objects that have a tag of enemy. Now, I've got to be honest, I don't think I've tagged my objects enemy. I have. Hurrah! They're tagged enemy. Brilliant. I knew that. Definitely was prepared. So then we can check the length for this, right? If enemies dot length is equal to 0, then we're going to trigger that event. So events controller dot enemies have all died, blah blah blah. And there's only one other thing I've got to do. The problem with this is it will execute the event over and over and over and over and over again because the length of the enemies will be dead. So what I'm going to do is very quickly up here, just stick in a boolean that say enemies dead executed, set it to false so that I can only execute this code once. So then I'm going to do quick if enemies event, if not, and enemies dead executed, then execute the event and set it to true. Now, all I'm doing there is making sure that only happens once. So I'm setting a boolean to false, and then if the length of the enemies is 0 and it's not true that I've executed this, execute it and set it to true. So this game controller is now finding all the objects in tag, and if there's none in it, it's going to execute that event. Although right now, nothing is looking at that event, right? So, but here's the thing. I'm going to do a thing where the player can't move when the enemies have all died, right? So, yeah, so there you go. I'm going to do a thing where a player can't move because the enemies have all died. Simple as that. So, I'm going to register for an event, and I'm going to add here dot enemies have all died, enemies all dead, and I'm going to add enemy. Okay, I'm going to do level over. Level complete, right? So then I've got to make a private void, called that, not called that, called that. By the way, that should be a minus. Level complete. And here's what we're going to do when level's complete. Now, I'm going to actually change some of my code from before. Rather than is paused, I'm going to, I'll just do another bool. I'll do level complete and set it to false, right? And then I'll do another one, if level complete, return. So it's either if it's paused, we return, if the level's complete, we return, right? Two things, boom. Now you might think, why don't you just change is pause? But the problem is they can complete the level, press pause, press unpause, and then they can move around again, which is a bit weird. So I'm doing two ways that stop movement. One if it's paused and one if the level's complete. And then, of course, it doesn't take a genius to work out. I'll put level complete equals true in here. Okay, so when the level complete is executed, then this will stop movement, right? So let's see if it works. Now, do you know what? I'm just going to delete these objects like that. Boom. Right, there we go. Well, oh, I was very quick. And then let's watch. There you go. And I can't move. And there you go. That's it. So, and now I can have other things. Like I could have, for example, a UI that responds to the level ending that says like, well done or something, or run some sort of coroutine, which we'll look at in the next video. You know, for like having like a cutscene kind of thing can happen. So that when the enemies are dead, I can do three things. And then the UI can just wait for the enemies to be killed. The enemy controller is going to check if all the enemies are dead. Not the enemy controller, the game controller. Obviously, I should be refactoring all this out. But that should be, just for completeness, that should be refactored out to a method that I stupidly called new method. I'll rename it pausing, check pause. And then this, of course, should be refactored out to check enemies, all dead, yeah, or whatever. Not the best code, I grant you. There we go. So that's how events work, and yeah, there you go, that's it. There are other ways to do things, certain things in the game, but that's sometimes events are really good. They're really good for things like the end of the level, start of the level. Like, for example, often when the level starts, you don't want to be able to move. You want to start the game not moving and have like some text that says level 1. Okay, and yeah, and then you would have the game start. So you would have like game start, you know, a coroutine that would set the text to level 1, wait 2 seconds, and then executes the game start event, and then everything listens to game start and starts to move around and do what it's supposed to do. That's the beauty of events, right? You just make that as your thing that you want to do. Okay, whatever the event's going to be, make your version of it. Go to where you want to trigger it. Okay, so in games pause start, I did it in the game controller, but yeah, I could have put that in many places. I again wouldn't put it in the player because I might want to destroy the player. And then whatever needs to respond to it, you have to do like, let's just get to a simple bit like that. Paused is true, and then you have to add this bit here. Right, there you go. I know it's confusing, but I tried my best to explain it, and I hope you got it.